Stephen John Paquette Gijnakaj. Gijnakaj is simply an Ojibwe word that means my name is. I was born John Andrew Kimawan. I have a spirit name, which is Bamanse Bamat Windinase Gijnakaj, and that translates into he walks a good life. My nationality is not Canadian, it is Ojibwe, or more specifically Anishinaabe. Makwa Dodem. Dodem meaning clan, Makwa meaning bear. I'm of the Bear Clan. I know my roles and responsibilities. I am from Wik-Wimikong, unceded territory up on Manitoulin Island in Georgian Bay. I am a traditional pipe carrier in my community. I am a former Eagle staff carrier in my community. I would also say that I am a son, I am a father, I am a brother, I am an uncle, I am a storyteller, and I like to think a friend to many people. And when I introduce myself, so what I'm trying to get to is a relationship not of a surface level, but one of depth. Because again, when we talk about relationships, one of the things that I find that, the books don't quite articulate it as well is that all relationships are sacred to First Nations people. So in wanting to introduce myself to you in that way of depth, it's a much deeper level. That's the relationship that I'm seeking, not a surface one. I was part of the 60 Scoop. I was removed from my family, from my community, from my culture, from my language, everything that I was. And it's been a very difficult journey for me in that regard. I remember to this day when my mother and my adopted mother and father sat me down at 12 years old and wanted to explain to me that I was adopted. And the funny thing about this is that I was actually outside playing with my friends, and we were playing cowboys and Indians. Which one do you think I was? I was the cowboy. I was the cowboy, absolutely. And you have to imagine at that time, I didn't know that I was Indian, using the term in context of the time. But growing up at that particular age, there was nothing to be proud of being Indian. We were taught nothing about our culture in schools other than that we were noble savages. So at the age of 12, having my parents sit down and not only tell me that I was adopted, but all of a sudden that I was Indian. It was something that I had a lot of difficulty processing, not only here, but here. This was this new identity. And then at that time, it was interesting because, and some people can certainly understand this, being surrounded by people, yet feeling all alone. I really struggled with my self-identity. Why was I adopted? Didn't my parents love me? Did no one in my family love me? Did I have any brothers and sisters? And then all of a sudden I was struggling with this enormous issue of, what do I have to do in order to be Indian? Do I have to learn to ride a horse? Do I have to learn to shoot bows and arrows? These were all the things that back in the day that people had these assumptions that as an Indian person, you automatically knew how to ride horses. You automatically knew how to shoot bows and arrows. No, that wasn't the case for me. One of the other things growing up is that when I was coming up to time to enter post-secondary education, I distinctly remember asking my mom that I wanted to go to university. And I said that I wanted to go to university and that I wanted to become a lawyer. And my mom and dad sat down at me at the table again. It was one of those heartfelt moments. And my mom looked at me with all the love she could muster in her eyes. And she says, "You're not capable." And so, not capable. I might not have had the highest marks in high school, high 70s, low 80s, but I had potential there. But my mom told me, and she looked me dead in the eye, and she said that when we adopted you, the adoption agency told us that because you were adopting an Indian child, not to have high expectations, that they aren't capable of much, that they are not capable of post-secondary education, and at best, they might get a job doing something with their hands. So this was back in 1970, probably. And my mom, looking at the institutions that surround us, that this was the authority, these were the people that knew best, my mom took that to heart and believed that. So unfortunately, I missed perhaps another calling that I might have had, to go on to post-secondary education and to become a lawyer. Failing that, I still wanted to do something to try and make a change in the world. And I applied to the Toronto Police Service. And again, it was a very interesting journey. Back in that day, when I was at the Ontario Police College, I was met with my fellow peers, my fellow students, and I was informed by them that I didn't have to graduate, that they were just going to hand me a diploma because I was Indian. So the expectation is that I didn't have to do anything, I just had to show up. And because I was a minority, because I was First Nations, or Indian, sorry, that they were just gonna give me a diploma. And I scratched my head and I said, well, I wish somebody had told me that because I wouldn't have been trying as hard. So at the end of the day, I passed at the Ontario Police College. I was not class valid Victorian. I had low 80s, but I was quite proud of myself. Entering into the workforce, I'd like to say that as an adult that my struggles and my challenges were over there, but that was far from it. To this day, I remember my very first day with the police service. I had a coach officer who was going to teach me how to be a professional police officer. Not just any police officer, but the best police officer that I could be. So within 5 minutes of the shift, we were driving through downtown Toronto and we happened to stop at a light. And there was a particular neighborhood that we were at where people from all around the world struggled with mental health and addictions issues. And while we were waiting at the light, all of a sudden my coach officer yelled, "Quick, get down, get down, get down." Not knowing what to expect, I got down in the wheel well, and I'm looking up at him and he says, "If we stay here at the red light too long, the Indians are gonna shoot arrows at us." And that was within the first 5 minutes of my being on the job in a professional organization. Didn't end there. 2 weeks later, I went on to get my very first paycheck. I was very proud of myself. I was in the locker room, and then I found myself surrounded by my peer employees, fellow police officers, and everyone was looking over my shoulders, and I'm trying to figure out why. And they said, "Oh, you're Indian, so you don't have to pay taxes." So when I opened up my paycheck, to my astonishment, I said, well, somebody needs to inform the government because they've taken off all the taxes. And again, this is this ignorance, that a bias, a prejudice based from ignorance that, they thought that all Indian people didn't pay any taxes, which may be true enough if you live and work on the reserve, but if you live off the reserve and if you work off the reserve, you pay the exact same taxes as everyone else. I remember it very fondly. In Toronto, there is the Native Canadian Centre at 16 Spadina Road, and back when I was probably 18 or 19, trying to find out who I was and my culture and my identity, I journeyed down that way. And as I was starting to walk up, I could hear this big boom, 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 boom. I didn't know what it was at the moment, but then as I got closer, I realized, oh, there's a drum going on. And I remember to this day how much I felt that. It touched me. It just resonated something inside of me. I walked up the stairs to the Native Canadian Centre. And again, not knowing anything about my culture, I wanted to go up to somebody and I wasn't sure if I was supposed to say, "How?" And again, everything from media and what I was taught. Farthest thing from it. But so I walked up and I looked around and I'm like, oh, there's a lot of Indians here. And I was overwhelmed with anxiety and I took off. Came back the next week again, I felt that drum. Didn't know why at the time, I know now, but it was drawing me in. And as I finally got in and I looked around and, there was an older lady there and she was sitting there and doing some beading with some younger ladies and things like that. And it was great. They were just having stories and things like that. There was a bunch of older men and young boys sitting at the drum, and it was such a strong vibration. It stirred something inside me. And then there was a gentleman in the back, and he had a bunch of youth, bunch of adults around, and I was a little curious. So I went to go listen to him, and he was telling a story. And it was a very interesting story. And as I'm listening to it, I'm thinking, wow. He's talking about courage. He's talking about bravery. And if I listen really closely, I think in his story, he's talking about values, really. I wonder if he knows that he's doing that. Little did I know at the time that that's how we educate ourselves. And so typically I would come back as much as I could. I would sit down a lot of time with the elders. And what I found is sometimes they didn't always finish the story. And so I'd have to come back. And I found that that's what they kind of did to distinguish differences, right? those that came back and said, do you remember that story that you were telling me last week about the beaver? Can you finish that? And so what I found is from that point on, they took a little bit more of an interest in me. I was there consistently. I'd be there till the end. Some of the stories were very, very long, 2 hours long. But again, that taught you patience, right? So spending a lot of time with different elders from different nations as well. And again, learning about humility. And then I have another very good friend of mine who I consider one of my early mentors. And we would spend a lot of time just shooting the breeze and talking about things. And then one day we were sitting down and I had asked him about a story and he said, no. And I said, why not? He says, you ask for a lot of these stories and a lot of these teachings, that's good. But what are you doing with them? He says, the point of education, any education, or the point of knowledge is to do something with it. And while I really appreciate your interest in these teachings, you're not doing anything with it. So he put me on a little hiatus for a while. And I had to kind of change the way that I walk, the way that I interact with people. And so what I found myself doing was trying to support a lot of people in my community, whether it was just with general advice, sometimes it was advocating for them, sometimes it was providing support, sometimes it was simply that all I could do was just, can I say prayers for you? And it took a little while after that, and he allowed me back off probation, and he continued with my teachings that I'm very grateful and very appreciative for. One of the other things is that I was really glad that working with the Toronto Police Service, I worked in their Aboriginal peacekeeping unit. And I remember to this day, one of my first elders, Lillian McGregor, had told me that I was going to act as that bridge between the Indian and the non-Indian world. And I never really knew what she meant for the first couple of years. One of my other first elders, Angus Pontiac, who had given me his eagle feather. It was my first eagle feather 32 years ago. And his marching orders for me were simply that you were going to do amazing things for our community, always do them with humbleness and humility. And as a young man, I wasn't sure what all of that meant. I thought, oh, am I destined to be famous? Am I going to be an actor? Or whatever it was. But I've found out over the last couple of years that being right here, right now, sitting and talking with you, that this is what they meant. I had left policing up north. I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. That was certainly part of it. So coming back down to Toronto, I'm not sure what I wanted to do, but also remembering my original marching orders 31 years ago from my original elders, that I knew that I was obligated to do something with the community in some regard. I had an organization in Toronto, Native Men's Residence, that I had a very good relationship with, and I'd asked them if there was any opportunities available. The executive director at the time knew my reputation in the community, and he simply gave me a chance. And what we were doing is that we were working with the homeless community in Toronto, so people with addictions and mental health issues, and simply trying to get them housed. And so all I simply did was just take my traditional teachings and the way that I had been taught with them, realizing that at the end of the day, it all started with relationships and acknowledging somebody's spirit, and that you really can't do that work until you acknowledge and build that relationship of depth, not at a surface level, and to also acknowledge the spirit of that individual that you're working with. Very pleased to say that I was very successful in getting a number of people housed. And again, I like to think that that's where it came from. So I'd say that I've probably been doing social work or social related work for over 15 years now. And I myself have never attended post-secondary for that. Again, it's just simply coming back to the traditional teachings. And this is something that I strive a lot of institutions to understand, is that we have many elders, many knowledge keepers, many healers in our community that are forced to work under this colonization system, I guess you will, of having to be acknowledged for the work that they do, otherwise they struggle in doing it. And I think that unfortunately that we're missing a lot of opportunities there. You know, for many, many, many years, a lot of our elders spoke about something called blood memory. And, you know, Western science kind of dismissed it as, you know, it's a superstitious nonsense They didn't understand it. And it was only maybe till perhaps 15 years ago that what they realized is when we were talking about blood memory, it was genetic memory. It was DNA. It was in our DNA. Much like we carry characteristic traits of our parents, our grandparents, we also carry those memories. So that trauma that my parents carry, that my grandparents carry, that my great-grandparents and my ancestors that walked before me, all the way going back to colonization, that blood memory is within me. It makes up who I am. And again, I didn't understand this until spending a lot of time sitting down with elders. One of the other teachings that I got that was fundamental to me from one of my elders is that, in terms of taking care of yourself, that importance of self-identity and knowing who you are, it's so important. And as I was taught is that when you have that sense of self-identity, it grounds you like that mighty oak tree. And while the winds of life, drama, and trauma may come, it may bend the tree a bit. You might even lose a few branches, but at the end of the day, what's going to keep you grounded is knowing who you are. When you don't have that sense of self-identity, you're going to become like that tumbleweed. And when the winds of change come in life, drama and trauma, as we all have, even as adults, you're going to be uplifted and you're going to be pushed around and you're not going to be in control. And just that teaching for me, I found so profound. So as much as all the trauma that I've gone through and even I suffer from anxiety to this day, I suffer from depression, but what keeps me grounded is that strong sense of self-identity in who I am, and that's unshakable.